At exactly 11:32 p.m. on Christmas Eve, the rain began to fall harder over Seattle, thin needles of light catching on street lamps, turning the city into a glittering mirage. From the outside, the house on Queen Anne Hill looked warm, alive, almost sacred. Every window glowed. A wreath hung perfectly centered on the door. To anyone passing by, it looked like the kind of home where laughter spilled freely, where love waited patiently at the table. Inside that house, Imani Brooks stood very still, holding a small wooden box in her hands, listening to the sound of her own breathing. The box was lighter than it should have been for something that had taken her a year to make. Inside was a brass compass, restored by hand, its glass polished until it caught the light just right. She had found it at a marine salvage yard months ago, rusted and forgotten, and spent late nights bringing it back to life. Graham loved objects like that, symbols, metaphors, things that made him feel anchored and important. She imagined him opening it in the morning, smiling, pulling her into a kiss that smelled like coffee and peppermint, saying, "You know me so well." The house smelled like pine and cloves. Soft jazz played low in the background. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. And somehow, the silence was too loud. If you've ever felt that quiet right before something breaks, stay with me. And if stories about truth, power, and the moment a woman refuses to stay silent speak to you, take a second to like this video, leave a comment, and follow the channel. It helps more stories like this find the people who need them. Imani set the box beneath the tree and straightened, rolling the tension from her shoulders, the way she did before walking into city council chambers. 35 years old, Chief Urban Resilience Officer for Seattle. The woman newspapers called unyielding, brilliant, difficult to intimidate. None of those words helped with the quiet. Graham was supposed to be home an hour ago. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Not a call, just a message. Running late, emergency meeting. I'll explain. Emergency meeting on Christmas Eve. Imani stared at the screen, her reflection faintly visible in the black glass. She didn't reply. She'd learned, over years of public service and private compromise, that rushing to respond only gave other people control of the tempo. Still, something tightened in her chest, subtle but insistent, like a warning bell far below the surface. She moved through the house, touching things without really seeing them. The dining table she'd insisted be reclaimed wood, scarred and imperfect. The bookshelf lined with policy reports and dog-eared novels from her college years in New Orleans. No luxury for luxury's sake here. Everything in this house had been chosen, earned, argued for, including Graham. They had met at a climate summit in San Francisco 6 years earlier. He'd been charming, brilliant, impossible to ignore. A man who spoke about infrastructure financing like it was poetry, who knew how to listen just long enough to make people feel seen. He'd admired her work, supported her ambition, told her she didn't have to choose between love and power. She had believed him. The rain intensified, tapping against the windows like restless fingers. Somewhere downtown, ferry horns sounded across the water. Seattle was alive tonight, families gathering, strangers clinking glasses, lovers promising forever. The city of lights did not pause for doubt. Imani poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter, eyes drifting to the framed photograph near the hallway. It showed her and Graham at the ribbon cutting of a new seawall project. He looked proud. She looked unstoppable. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Graham. It was a text from Jade Moreno. "Call me tonight, please, not tomorrow." No emojis, no jokes. Jade never sent messages like that unless something was wrong. Imani's fingers hovered over the screen. She thought of Graham's message, of the emergency meeting, of the silence sitting heavy in a house filled with light. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the city clean, as if preparing it for a truth that was already on its way. And for the first time that night, Imani Brooks felt it clearly. This Christmas was not going to end the way she thought it would. Imani waited 3 breaths before she called Jade back. The way she waited before making a decision that could move a city's budget or break a contractor's reputation. 3 breaths to keep emotion from driving. 3 breaths to make sure her voice would come out steady. Jade answered on the first ring, as if she'd been holding her phone in her palm the entire time. Imani, she said, and that single word carried a weight that didn't belong in a Christmas Eve house. Where are you? Home, Queen Anne. Imani kept her gaze on the kitchen window, where rain slid down the glass in trembling lines. What's going on? A pause. Not the kind that happens when someone is searching for words. The kind that happens when someone is deciding how much truth a person can survive at once. I don't want to do this over the phone, Jade said finally. Her voice was low, careful, the voice she used on her podcast when she was about to name something dangerous. But I don't want you alone tonight either. I'm not alone, Imani lied automatically, then hated herself for it. She swallowed, tasting cinnamon and bitterness. Graham's running late. Jade made a sound that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite anger. Is he running late? Or is he doing what he always does when he thinks you'll forgive him because you're tired? Imani's jaw tightened. Jade was her closest friend, the only person who could say things like that and live to see another day. They'd met years ago during a federal investigation into disaster funds that vanished after a hurricane. Jade had been the journalist digging. Imani had been the policy analyst who refused to look away. They'd been young and furious, and certain the truth mattered. It still did. It just cost more now. Jade, Imani warned softly, tell me why you texted. Another pause, longer. I got a tip, Jade said, about Whitlock Capital, about Graham. The name tightened the room like a fist closing. Imani felt it physically, the air shifting, the house narrowing around her, the warm lights suddenly too bright. What kind of tip? She asked, though she already knew there were only a few kinds that arrived on Christmas Eve with that kind of caution. The kind I can't ignore, Jade said, the kind that comes with documents. Imani's fingers curled around the edge of the counter. Whitlock Capital was a private firm that specialized in municipal financing, green bonds, infrastructure funding, public-private partnerships. Graham made his money talking cities into trusting him with their futures. He was good at it, so good that even skeptics ended up laughing with him by the end of a dinner. Are you investigating him? Imani asked. I'm investigating a system, Jade corrected, and there was steel under the softness. But he's in it, deep. Imani stared at the Christmas tree visible from the kitchen, its lights blinking patiently, as if the house could blink its way out of reality. Beneath it, the little wooden box waited, innocent and foolish. Jade continued, I didn't tell you earlier because I needed to verify. I needed to make sure I wasn't about to throw a grenade into your life based on rumor. And now? Imani's voice came out too controlled, too calm, the calm that meant she was holding herself together by force. Now I have receipts, Jade said, emails, transfers, a calendar log that doesn't match what they reported. And I'm still confirming, but Imani, I think he's helping move money the city never agreed to move. Imani's throat went dry. In her work, money was not just money. Money was seawalls and shelters and emergency generators and raised roads for neighborhoods that flooded every winter. Money was whether people lived through the next storm. You think he's stealing? Imani asked. I think he's laundering, Jade said, and that word fell like a stone. And I think he's doing it with a smile. Imani closed her eyes. She thought of Graham at fundraisers, shaking hands, charming donors, being praised for supporting community resilience. She thought of him slipping his arm around her waist in photographs, like he belonged there, like he had earned a place beside her. Who gave you this? She asked quietly. Jade hesitated. I can't say yet. Imani's pulse quickened. Why not? Because it's complicated. Jade's voice turned careful again. Because the person is close to him. And because if I say the name, you might do something before we're ready. Before we're ready. Words you said when the truth was a weapon and timing decided who bled. Imani drew in a slow breath. Tell me what you need. I need you to promise me something, Jade said. Imani's laugh was short and humorless. You're asking me to promise things on Christmas Eve. Bold choice. Imani, Jade's voice sharpened. If he's doing what I think he's doing, he'll try to protect himself. Men like him don't fall quietly. They drag people down with them. And you, I'm not complicit, Imani cut in. I didn't say you were, Jade's voice softened. But the public won't care about nuance. They'll ask why you didn't know. They'll ask what you benefited from. They'll ask if the black woman with the powerful title was in on it. And you know how hungry people get when they think they've found a reason to punish someone like you. The room was too quiet again. Even the jazz seemed to have retreated into the walls. Imani swallowed hard. Jade wasn't wrong. She had spent her entire career walking a thin wire. Competent but not aggressive. Confident but not arrogant. Brilliant but never threatening. She had learned to anticipate the ways people would twist her success into suspicion. The phone buzzed in her hand as another call came through, interrupting Jade's breathing. Evelyn Whitlock. Imani stared at the name, and dread spread through her chest like ink in water. Jade, she said softly, his mother is calling me. A sharp inhale on the other end. Don't answer. Imani looked at the glowing tree, the box beneath it, the house dressed in warmth like armor. She thought of the city outside, bright, wet, indifferent. She thought of Graham's message, I'll explain. And then she thought of something Jade had said once, years ago, when a mayor tried to bury a story with charm and power. Silence is how they win. Imani slid her thumb across the screen and answered. Imani, sweetheart, Evelyn Whitlock purred, her voice polished like silverware. I was just thinking of you. The words were gentle. The intent was not. Imani straightened as if someone had pulled a string through her spine. Evelyn, Merry Christmas. Oh yes, Merry Christmas. A delicate pause. Is Graham with you? No. Imani did not elaborate. Another pause, sharper. He told me he had a late meeting. Again. I hope you aren't sitting there alone, in that big house, playing the martyr. Imani's fingers tightened around the phone. I'm fine. Good. Evelyn's satisfaction was audible, as if she'd confirmed something she already believed. Listen, I won't keep you. I simply wanted to remind you. Tomorrow's donor brunch at the Edgewater. The board will be there, several council members, and the Langfords. She said that last name like it was a test. Wear something appropriate, understated, elegant. Don't over-signal. Over-signal. A phrase that meant, don't remind people you're not one of us. Imani's stomach turned. I wasn't planning on... Of course you were, Evelyn interrupted smoothly. It's important for Graham. It's important for the family. And frankly, it's important for you. Seattle loves a success story, but they love it more when the story knows its place. Imani's nails pressed into her palm hard enough to sting. On the other line, Jade was silent, listening. Evelyn continued, voice sweet as poison. And darling, one more thing. I heard you've been delaying children. I do hope you're not letting ambition make that decision for you. Men don't wait forever. Imani's vision blurred for a second, not with tears, but with heat. Rage. The kind you swallowed because you had learned the cost of letting it show. Graham and I will handle our family planning, Imani said, each word measured. Evelyn chuckled softly. Of course. I'm only saying what any woman with experience would say. Don't let your career make you forget what matters. The call ended without goodbye. Imani stood frozen, phone still pressed to her ear, as if the sound of Evelyn's voice had left an imprint on her skin. The room felt smaller now. The warm lights felt like interrogation lamps. The Christmas tree looked like a staged photograph, beautiful, curated, empty. On the line, Jade finally spoke, her voice sharp with urgency. Imani, listen to me. Don't go to that brunch. Don't let them position you. Not until you know what's real. Imani lowered the phone slowly, staring at the counter where her wine sat untouched. The rain scraped against the windows, Somewhere, far away, a siren rose and faded. "What do you mean, position me?" Imani asked, though she already understood. Evelyn didn't call to wish her joy. Evelyn called to claim her, to manage her, to keep her in the frame where she was useful. Jade's voice came back, low and intense. "I mean, if the story breaks, they'll want you in a room full of witnesses, smiling, acting loyal. They'll want photos of you beside them. They'll want you trapped in their narrative." Imani's pulse hammered. Her gaze slid back to the Christmas tree and the gift beneath it. A compass meant to guide a man who had never once asked what direction she needed. The phone buzzed again on the counter, and this time it wasn't Evelyn. It was an email notification from an unfamiliar address. Subject line, "You don't know him, but you need to." Imani's breath caught. Her thumb hovered over the screen, the way it hovered over every decision that could alter the shape of her life. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet voice rose, steady, unafraid, the voice she used when a contractor lied in her face or a politician tried to bully her into compromise. "Open it." Imani tapped the email, and the room tightened around her like it already knew what was inside. The email opened without ceremony, as if it were nothing more than a grocery receipt or a forgotten newsletter. No dramatic flourish, no warning music, just words on a screen that rearranged the shape of the night. "Imani, I don't know you, but I know him, and I'm running out of time. There's something you need to see. Tonight. If I'm wrong, you'll hate me. If I'm right, you'll never forgive yourself for staying home." Below the message was an address, not a name, not an explanation, just coordinates, dropped like a match into dry grass. Imani read it twice, then a third time, searching for tone the way she searched witness statements for motive. The sender's email was generic, burner-level anonymity, but the address was not random. She recognized it immediately. Whitlock Capital, downtown Seattle, Graham's building. Her phone rang. Graham's name lit the screen this time, bright and insistent, as if nothing in the world were wrong. Imani let it ring. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, the kind that clung to skin and fabric, the kind Seattle perfected. She moved through the house with deliberate calm, slipping on her coat, her boots, grabbing her keys. No frantic gestures, no dramatic pauses, just action. In the mirror by the door, she caught her reflection. Dark curls pulled back, eyes steady, face composed in a way that had unnerved men in conference rooms and court hearings alike. She did not look like a woman about to have her life split open. She looked like a woman going to verify a fact. The drive downtown felt unreal. The city transformed into streaks of white and gold through the windshield. Christmas lights blurred past. Couples crossed streets hand in hand. Somewhere, laughter rose from a bar, spilling warmth onto the sidewalk. Imani parked beneath the Whitlock Capitol Tower and sat for a moment, engine idling, hands resting on the steering wheel. She thought of Jade's voice, of Evelyn's smile, of the gift under the tree waiting for a man who might already be gone. Then she stepped out into the cold. The lobby was nearly empty, marble floors echoing beneath her heels. A security guard glanced up, nodded, recognition came with public office, and went back to a screen. The elevator accepted her access card without protest. 34 floors. The ascent felt longer than it was, her ears popping slightly as the numbers climbed. With each floor, the message replayed in her mind. If I'm right, you'll never forgive yourself for staying home. The doors opened onto a corridor of glass and steel, silent except for the distant hum of the building. Most offices were dark, emptied for the holiday, but at the far end of the floor, light spilled from behind a frosted door. Graham's private conference suite. Imani's steps slowed, instinct pressing caution into her spine. She told herself this was nothing. A late meeting, a client crisis, a misunderstanding wrapped in paranoia and rain. Then she heard it. Laughter. Not polite laughter, not professional laughter. A woman's laugh. Bright, loose, unguarded. The kind of laugh that belonged to someone who believed she was safe. Imani stopped. Her heart did not race. It dropped, heavy and sudden, like an elevator whose cables had snapped. Every detail sharpened, the muted scent of expensive cologne in the air, the faint clink of glass, the low murmur of Graham's voice, warm and intimate in a way he hadn't sounded at home in months. She walked forward. Each step echoed too loudly on the polished floor, as if the building itself were trying to warn her back. The conference room door was ajar, light spilling into the hallway in a narrow, golden blade. Imani reached it and paused, fingers hovering near the handle. This was the moment, the one people talked about later. The one split second where ignorance was still an option, where she could turn around and preserve the fragile lie of her life for one more night. She thought of the neighborhoods she'd fought for, the storms she'd planned against, the futures she'd protected by refusing to look away. Imani pushed the door open. The scene inside was almost absurd in its simplicity. Graham stood beside the leather sofa, his jacket discarded, tie loosened, a champagne flute abandoned on the table. A young woman sat where Imani usually sat during late nights at the office, her dress rumpled, her hair falling from a clip Graham had once bought Imani in Paris. An overnight bag lay open at their feet, clothes spilling out with careless intimacy. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Graham turned. Imani, her name cracked in his mouth like ice underfoot. The woman's eyes widened, shock flooding her face as she scrambled to stand. She looked young, younger than Imani had expected. Not reckless, not cruel, just unprepared. Imani took it all in with clinical clarity. The lipstick stain on Graham's collar, the second champagne glass, the bag packed for more than a meeting. So this is the emergency, Imani said calmly. The room tilted. Graham's mouth opened, closed. This isn't what it looks like, Imani finished for him, her voice steady enough to frighten herself. It's exactly what it looks like. The woman reached for her coat with shaking hands. I didn't know, Graham snapped. Get out, now. She didn't argue. She fled past Imani, perfume trailing behind her like a confession, leaving silence in her wake. The door clicked shut. Imani and Graham stood alone in the wreckage. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering across his face, before he masked it with something practiced and familiar. You weren't supposed to find out like this. Imani laughed once, a sharp, unfamiliar sound. Find out what, Graham? That you're late? Or that you packed a bag to spend Christmas somewhere I wasn't invited? This has been complicated, he said, as if complexity excused betrayal. You're always busy, always working. I felt lonely, Imani asked softly. So you lied. His jaw tightened. I want a divorce. The words landed clean and brutal, stripping the air from the room. Imani stared at him, truly stared, seeing not the man she'd married, but the calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. She nodded once. You should have said that before you planned a holiday with someone else. Graham opened his mouth to respond, but Imani was already turning away. She walked out of the room, down the silent corridor, into the elevator that carried her back toward the city without a single sound of regret. Outside, the rain had stopped. The lights of Seattle shimmered against wet pavement, beautiful and indifferent. Imani stood on the sidewalk, breath fogging in the cold, and understood something with devastating clarity. The door she just opened was never meant to be opened, and nothing on the other side of it would ever be the same. Imani did not remember how she got to the car. Later, people would ask, softly, carefully, as if handling glass, how did you make it home? She would tell them the truth. She didn't know. Her body had taken over, carrying her through rain-slicked streets and red lights that blurred into one long, pulsing vein of the city. What she remembered was the sound of the door closing behind her in that tower. The finality of it, not slammed, not dramatic, just closed, like a decision already made. Her phone vibrated against the passenger seat. Once, twice, again. Graham. She turned the screen face down. Seattle passed by in reflections. Wet pavement catching neon, storefronts glowing with last-minute Christmas cheer. Couples hurried along sidewalks with wrapped boxes and breathless laughter. Somewhere, a choir practiced carols, their voices drifting out into the cold. The city was celebrating. Imani was unraveling. When she reached Queen Anne Hill, the house greeted her exactly as she'd left it. Warm lights, curtains drawn, the wreath still centered on the door like a promise that hadn't gotten the memo. Inside, the silence rushed at her. She dropped her keys onto the console table. The sound echoed too loudly, as if the house were hollow now, emptied of something essential. Her coat slid from her shoulders and pooled on the floor. She didn't pick it up. The Christmas tree blinked patiently in the corner, its rhythm unchanged. Beneath it, the wooden box waited, small, ridiculous, devastating. Imani crossed the room and knelt, lifting the box with hands that finally shook. A compass. She turned it slowly, watching the needle quiver before settling north. Always north, unfazed by the chaos around it. She had restored it because Graham liked the idea of direction, because he liked to believe he was a man who knew where he was going. Her laugh broke free then, sharp and cracked, startling her in the quiet. An open secret, she realized. That was what this was. Not just the affair, not just the woman in the office, but the way the truth had been hiding in plain sight, rearranging itself to look harmless. The late nights, the locked door, the casual entitlement with which Graham assumed he could have two lives and keep them neatly separated. She rose, the compass still in her hand, and crossed to the window. From here, the city stretched out below her, a constellation of lives intersecting and diverging, millions of private choices unfolding at once. Her phone buzzed again, a text this time. "Please answer. We need to talk." Need. The word scraped at her nerves, as if this were a scheduling conflict, as if talking could stitch together what had already been torn. Imani set the compass down on the windowsill and finally looked at her phone. Another message followed, this one longer, more careful. "I didn't want you to find out like that. I was going to tell you after the holidays. I swear, after the holidays, after one more perfect photograph, one more donor brunch, one more Christmas where she played the role expected of her, smiling beside a man who had already left." Her chest tightened, not with sadness this time, but with something colder, sharper. She typed slowly, deliberately. "You didn't tell me because telling me would have cost you control." The reply came almost instantly. "That's not fair." Imani smiled, a thin, humorless curve of her lips. Fairness was what people invoked when they were losing. Her phone rang again, the screen lighting up with his name, insistent now, almost frantic. She watched it vibrate until it went silent. Then it rang once more. A different name this time. "Jade." Imani answered without hesitation. "I saw him," she said, before Jade could speak. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, like it was traveling through water. "With her." Jade exhaled sharply. "I'm so sorry." Imani closed her eyes. "Don't be. Sorry keeps people small." There was a pause on the line, thick with things unsaid. "Are you safe?" Jade asked. "Yes." Imani opened her eyes and looked around the house. The furniture she'd chosen, the walls she'd painted herself, the life she had built piece by piece. "But I think he's already started moving." "What do you mean?" "His mother called. She wanted me visible, compliant." Imani's jaw set. "And he just texted me that he was going to tell me." Jade didn't hesitate. "Then he's preparing a version of the story where you're the obstacle, not the truth." Imani nodded, even though Jade couldn't see her. "I know." Outside, snow began to fall, soft and unexpected, mingling with the remnants of rain. The city lights caught in it, turning the air into something almost magical. Inside, something in Imani shifted into place. "What did the email say?" Jade asked quietly. Imani glanced at her phone, at the message still open. The address burned into her memory. It said I wouldn't forgive myself if I stayed home. "And now?" Jade asked. Imani looked at the compass on the windowsill, its needle unwavering. "Now," she said, her voice steady, resolved, I'm done pretending this was a secret. The house fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence this time. Not the quiet of avoidance, the quiet of a storm pulling itself together. Outside, Seattle shimmered, unaware, unconcerned, relentless in its forward motion. And Imani Brooks stood in the center of her life, surrounded by light, finally seeing the open secret for what it was. The truth had been waiting, and she was done looking away. Graham showed up just after midnight. Imani knew it was him before the knock came, before the sharp, insistent rhythm cut through the house. The air itself seemed to tense, like it recognized the source of the disturbance. Snow had begun to fall in earnest now, thick flakes drifting past the windows, catching in the glow of the street lamps. The world outside looked suspended, fragile, as if someone had shaken it and forgotten to set it down. A snow globe. Imani stood in the living room, barefoot on the cool wood floor, and waited for the second knock. It came harder. She opened the door. Graham stood on the porch, coat unbuttoned, hair damp with snow, eyes bright with a feverish urgency that made something in her recoil. He looked wrong here, too loud for the quiet, too alive for the stillness she had claimed. "Thank God," he said, stepping forward. Imani didn't move. He stopped short, confusion flickering across his face. "Imani, listen." "No," she said, and the word was soft, precise, immovable. "You listen." For a heartbeat, they stared at each other, the space between them filled with breath and cold and everything that had shattered in the last hour. Then Graham exhaled, visibly recalibrating. She saw it happen, the shift, the familiar mask sliding into place. "You're upset," he said gently, as if speaking to a child. "I get that. Anyone would be. But this doesn't have to become something bigger than it is." Imani tilted her head. "You brought a packed bag to your office on Christmas Eve." He waved a hand, dismissive. "That's not what it looked like." She laughed. Not loudly, not hysterically, just enough to let him know she heard the lie. "You said that already," she replied. "In the conference room. I'm curious, how many times has that worked for you?" Graham's jaw tightened. "You're twisting this." "No," Imani said calmly. "I'm seeing it clearly for the first time." Snow collected on the railing behind him, softening the edges of the world. The city had gone quiet, holding its breath. Graham stepped closer again, lowering his voice. "You've been distant for months, always working, always saving the city. You don't even see me anymore." There it was, the pivot. Imani felt something inside her loosen, not break, not ache, but release. She'd heard this argument before, just never aimed so directly at her throat. "So you cheated," she said flatly. "I didn't say that," he snapped. "I said I was lonely." "And lying helped?" she asked. "Locking doors helped? Planning a holiday with someone else helped?" His face flushed, irritation bleeding through the calm. "You make everything sound so cold." Imani stepped back, letting the door swing wider. "Come inside," she said. "If you're going to rewrite history, do it where it's warm." He followed, relief flashing briefly across his features, mistaking permission for forgiveness. The door closed behind him. The house absorbed his presence reluctantly. The tree lights blinked on, off, on, steady, indifferent. The compass still sat on the windowsill, catching reflections of snow. Graham glanced around, his gaze landing on the wrapped gift beneath the tree. Something like guilt crossed his face, fleeting and shallow. "I was going to tell you," he said again, softer now. "After the holidays, I didn't want to ruin Christmas." Imani turned to face him fully. "You didn't want to ruin your Christmas." He opened his mouth, then closed it, frustration replacing remorse. "Why are you doing this? Why are you acting like I'm the villain?" Her eyes locked onto his. "Because you are." The word hung between them, undeniable. Graham scoffed. "You're being dramatic." There it was. The oldest trick. Shrink the woman. Question her sanity. Reframe betrayal as overreaction. Imani felt the last of her uncertainty evaporate, replaced by something cold and clean. "You don't get to tell me how to react to your choices." she said. You don't get to decide which parts of this hurt. He stepped closer, voice rising. You're never here. You care more about your title, your press, your projects than you do about us. You, S. The word sounded foreign now. Imani gestured around the room. This house exists because I'm never here. This life exists because I work. The neighborhoods I protect exist because I don't choose comfort over responsibility. So I'm just supposed to sit in your shadow? He shot back. And there it was, the truth, stripped bare. Imani studied him in the soft glow of the lights, really seeing him now, not the charming financier, not the supportive husband, but a man threatened by the space she took up. You didn't want a partner, she said quietly. You wanted an audience. His face hardened. I want a divorce. The words landed again, but this time they didn't wound. They clarified. Imani nodded once. Then you should leave. He stared at her, stunned. Just like that? Yes, she said. Just like that. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. Outside, snow continued to fall, erasing footprints almost as soon as they formed. Graham looked around the room again, as if searching for leverage. You'll regret this, he said finally. You're throwing everything away. Imani walked to the window and looked out at the city, at the lights reflected in snow and glass, at the world moving forward without asking permission. No, she replied. I'm choosing myself. When she turned back, Graham was already backing toward the door, anger and disbelief battling across his face. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He left. The door closed and the sound echoed once through the house, final and absolute. Imani stood alone as the clock ticked past midnight, Christmas officially arriving without ceremony or magic. She watched the snow fall, transforming the world into something deceptively pure. Inside her, the shaking began, not from grief, but from the force of something forming. The pain didn't break her. It crystallized. Rage, sharp and focused, settled into her bones, steady as the compass on the windowsill. Graham Whitlock thought this night had freed him. He had no idea what he had just started. Imani did not sleep. The house never truly went quiet after Graham left. It only changed its kind of silence, no longer the suffocating hush of denial, but the taut stillness of a wire pulled tight, humming with pressure. The Christmas tree lights blinked through the hours like a slow, patient heartbeat, indifferent to what had happened in the room beside it. At 3:07 a.m., Imani blocked Graham's number. At 3:09, she blocked Evelyn's, not out of spite, out of strategy. She'd spent her career learning that people who believe they own the narrative will use any opening, any crack, to wedge themselves back into control. She would not offer them one. By dawn, the snow had thickened over Seattle, whitening rooftops and softening the edges of the city. For a moment, everything looked clean, new, forgiven. It wasn't. At 7:16 a.m., there was a knock, not loud, not urgent. The knock of someone who didn't need permission to enter because they had already made a home in your life. Jade Moreno stepped inside with a paper cup of coffee in each hand and the kind of expression that meant she'd been awake longer than she'd admit. Her dark curls were tucked into a beanie, her cheeks red from cold, her eyes sharp with protective fury. She didn't ask how Imani was. She didn't offer empty softness. She looked at Imani's face, registered the exhaustion and the stillness, and said, "Tell me everything." Imani took the coffee without speaking because words felt too small for the night she'd survived. She led Jade to the kitchen table where the morning light was pale and thin, as if even the sun was reluctant to touch this story. Jade set her bag down and unzipped it. Inside was an iPad, a small recorder, and a thick manila envelope swollen with paper. Imani's throat tightened. That's a lot for Christmas morning. Jade's mouth twisted, humorless. This isn't Christmas. This is a crime scene. She slid the envelope across the table. Imani didn't touch it yet. You said you had a tip. Jade's gaze held hers. Imani, I didn't get one tip. I got a trail, and it leads straight through your husband's office. The word husband tasted wrong now, like a garment she'd outgrown overnight. Jade opened the iPad and tapped. A folder appeared on the screen. Whitlock/Resilience Fund. Beneath it were subfolders, each labeled with dates and names that made Imani's stomach tighten. "Where did this come from?" Imani asked, voice low. Jade hesitated, then said, carefully, "From someone inside Whitlock Capital. Someone close to him. You won't tell me who." "Not yet." Jade leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Because if you know, you might go looking. And I need you alive and unburned." Imani's fingers curled around her coffee cup, seeking warmth. "Jade, don't listen." Jade's tone sharpened. "This isn't about him cheating. That's personal. She gestured to the file. "This is structural. This is what powerful men do when they think the world is theirs. They don't just betray women, they betray systems. They siphon futures." She tapped the screen again and brought up an email chain. Imani's eyes scanned it, training kicking in. Subject lines, attachments, approvals. The language of finance dressed up as civic progress. "Green infrastructure bond allocation," she read aloud. "Subcontractor reassignment." Jade nodded. They created shell vendors. Clean names, local sounding, community forward. Money moves from city-linked funds into those vendors, then out again to offshore accounts or private holdings through layered transfers. Imani's pulse began to thud behind her ribs. Seattle's resilience funding isn't supposed to go through Whitlock's discretionary accounts. "It isn't," Jade said, "but they wrote clauses no one noticed. Buried terms, administrative handling, consulting adjustments, the kind of language that sounds harmless until you follow the money." Imani's hand tightened around the cup, hard enough to hurt. "How much?" Jade exhaled. "At least 12 million that I can document, possibly more. And," she slid a paper across the table, a printed spreadsheet with highlighted rows. "They used your project's credibility as cover. Your name on the initiative gave it legitimacy. That's why it worked." Imani felt a surge of nausea. Not guilt, something worse. The violation of being used like a mask. "I didn't sign off on this," she said fiercely. "I know," Jade's voice softened slightly. "I'm not accusing you. I'm warning you. If this breaks, they'll try to fold you into it. They'll say you must have known. They'll say you benefited. They'll say you were too ambitious, too proud, too hungry." Imani stared at the sheet, eyes blurring, not with tears, but with rage that threatened to become fire. Jade reached into the envelope and pulled out a second set of papers. Photos this time. Printed images of Graham entering the office late at night. Graham in elevators. Graham with a woman whose face was partially obscured by her hair. A familiar clip. A glimpse of a dress. The curve of a shoulder. Imani's breath caught. "That's her," Jade nodded once. "And this is where it gets worse." She took out a small USB drive and set it on the table like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "There are recordings," Jade said quietly. "Phone calls, voice memos. One where he talks about moving funds before the year closes. One where he mentions you by name and calls you useful." The word slammed into Imani's chest. Jade continued, voice precise. "And there's something else. The source. The person who gave me all of this. They weren't trying to be noble." Imani's eyes lifted. "Then why?" Jade's gaze didn't waver. "Because they're terrified." Imani's pulse spiked. "Terrified of what?" "Of being blamed." Jade's mouth tightened. "Of being sacrificed. Because your husband doesn't just cheat, he recruits. He manipulates. He makes people believe they're special. Then he positions them as shields." Imani looked down at the USB drive, at the printed transfers, at the emails and photos that turned her personal devastation into a public reckoning. "Jade," she whispered, her voice rough, "if you publish this." "He goes to prison," Jade finished, "and his mother will burn the city down to protect the Whitlock name." Imani's jaw clenched. "Then why bring it to me?" Jade's eyes softened, just for a breath. "Because I'm not a tabloid. Because I'm not going to use your life for clicks. Because I need you to know what's coming, and I need you to be ready when he tries to turn this on you." Imani sat back slowly, the chair creaking beneath her. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in false innocence. Inside, the truth lay open on her kitchen table, an open secret no longer. And in that moment, Imani understood the shape of what Graham had really done. He hadn't just betrayed her heart. He had tried to borrow her integrity like it was another asset he could leverage. She looked up at Jade, her voice low and lethal. "When does this go public?" Jade held her gaze. "As soon as I'm sure it won't collapse in court. 48 hours if we move fast." Imani nodded once, feeling something settle into her bones. Cold, clear, irreversible. "Then we move fast," she said, and the room tightened, not with fear this time, but with purpose. Daniel Cho didn't waste time on sympathy. That was why Imani had called him. He arrived just after noon, snow melting off his coat, briefcase in hand, eyes already scanning the room the way surgeons scan an operating table. He didn't comment on the Christmas tree still blinking in the corner. He didn't ask how she was holding up. He sat, set his phone face down and said, "Tell me exactly what you knew and exactly when you knew it." Imani appreciated the precision. She told him everything. The late nights, the locked conference room, the affair she had discovered less than 12 hours ago, Jade's investigation, the files on her kitchen table, the USB drive that seemed to hum with consequence. Daniel listened without interruption, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "All right," he said, "here's the danger." The word landed heavier than fear. "Legally," Daniel continued, "spouses are not automatically liable for each other's crimes. But optics matter. Prosecutors look for proximity. Journalists look for implication. And defense attorneys," his mouth tightened, "look for someone else to blame." Imani's jaw set. "I didn't sign anything. I didn't authorize anything. My office doesn't even route funds through Whitlock Capital." "I believe you," Daniel said. "That's not the point." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad already filled with notes. "Your husband's best move, if he's as smart as he thinks he is, will be to suggest you benefited indirectly. Access, influence, prestige. He'll say your name opened doors. He'll say you knew just enough to look away." Imani felt heat rise in her chest. "That's a lie." "Yes," Daniel said calmly, "but it's a useful one." He flipped the page. "You are a high-profile black woman in public office, which means you don't get the benefit of the doubt. You get scrutiny. You get suspicion dressed up as concern. You get headlines that end with question marks." Imani closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the familiar sting of that truth. "So, what do we do?" Daniel's gaze sharpened. "We build a wall between you and him so clean it cuts." He slid the pad toward her. On it was a list: separate finances, documented refusals, independent counsel, timeline. "Tell me about your money," he said. Imani straightened. "We've never had joint accounts. Ever. I insisted on it before we married. Every paycheck, every investment, mine goes into accounts only I control. Same with him." Daniel nodded once. "Smart." "I also refuse to attend closed-door donor meetings tied to his firm," she continued. "And I recused myself from any decision where Whitlock Capital even smelled like a conflict." Daniel's pen paused. "You have that in writing?" Imani stood, walked to the study, and returned with a folder. Inside were emails, calendar notes, recusal memos, paper trails built not from paranoia, but from memory, of poverty, of watching systems fail people who trusted too easily. Daniel flipped through them, eyebrows lifting. "This is meticulous." "I learned early," Imani said quietly, "that people like to borrow your credibility. I don't lend it without a contract." For the first time, Daniel smiled, not kindly, respectfully. "This will help," he said. "A lot. But," he added, holding up a finger, "it doesn't make you bulletproof." Imani met his gaze. What does? Behavior, Daniel said. What you do next. He leaned forward. You do not confront him again without counsel. You do not explain yourself to his mother. You do not attend any event where you could be photographed beside him. You do not accept apologies, gifts, or private resolutions. Every interaction from here on out is strategic. Imani exhaled slowly. He'll try to talk to me. He already is, Daniel said, and when that fails, he'll try to scare you. As if summoned by the words, Imani's phone buzzed on the table. An unknown number. She didn't answer. Daniel continued, if Jade publishes, and she should, assuming her lawyers sign off, your husband will claim persecution. He'll suggest you turned on him because he asked for a divorce. He'll say you weaponize your connections. Imani's eyes hardened. And if he does, then we're ready, Daniel said, because here's the thing about men who gaslight. They always leave fingerprints. In emails, in recordings, in patterns. He closed his notebook. You didn't just marry a liar. You married someone who believes he's untouchable. That makes him sloppy. Imani thought of Graham in the conference room, the frustration on his face, the confidence with which he'd said, I want a divorce. He'd believed that was the end of the story. Daniel, she said, if this goes public, how ugly does it get? He didn't soften it. Very. They'll question your judgment, your ambition, your motives. Someone will imply you slept your way into influence. Someone else will imply you were too cold to deserve loyalty. None of it will be subtle. Imani nodded, the familiar weight settling on her shoulders. And the law? If the evidence holds, Daniel said, he's looking at federal charges, fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, years. Silence stretched between them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing tracks, disguising damage. Inside, Imani felt something align. Not fear, not grief, but resolve. Okay, she said finally, then we do this right. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Define right. She leaned forward, voice steady. No leaks without proof. No half-truths. No emotional decisions. We protect my work, my team, the communities tied to these funds. And we don't let him drag anyone else down with him. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Good. He stood, gathering his things. One more thing. Yes? He met her eyes. This will cost him everything. And when that becomes clear, he may offer you the one thing he thinks matters most. Imani's lips curved, just slightly. Money. Exactly, Daniel said. Don't take it. She shook her head. I don't want his money. Daniel paused at the door. Then what do you want? Imani looked toward the window, at the city she had sworn to protect, at the snow-softened skyline that hid nothing for long. I want the truth, she said, and I want it clean. Daniel nodded once and left. Imani stood alone again, the house quiet, but no longer passive. On the table lay the files that could end a marriage, a career, a legacy. Her phone buzzed once more. Another unknown number. A text this time. We need to talk before this gets out of hand. Imani picked up the phone, stared at the message, and then did something Graham had never expected. She didn't respond, because the trap had already been set. And this time, she wasn't the one walking into it. Jade didn't bring Sloan to Imani's house. That was intentional. They met in a small conference room above a closed cafe near Pike Place, the kind of neutral space journalists favored when truth needed to breathe without witnesses. The windows were fogged from the cold outside, blurring the market lights into soft halos. It felt suspended, neither public nor private, neither safe nor exposed. Imani arrived first. She chose the chair closest to the door. When Sloan Mercer finally walked in, she didn't look like the woman from the office. She looked younger, smaller. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, her coat a size too thin for December. Her eyes ringed with the kind of exhaustion that came from weeks of sleeping in short, panicked stretches. She carried a laptop clutched to her chest like armor. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. This was the woman Graham had chosen. Not because she was better, not because she was brighter, but because she was easier to bend. Sloan broke first. I didn't know it was going to be you. Imani's voice was calm, almost clinical. You knew he was married. Yes, the word came fast, defensive, then slower. He told me you were cold, distant, married to your job. He said you didn't want children, that you made him feel small. Imani flinched despite herself, not because it was true, but because it was familiar. She'd heard variations of that story her entire career, recycled and repackaged whenever a man felt eclipsed. Jade watched silently from the corner, recorder on the table, red light blinking. Sloan swallowed. I didn't set out to hurt you. Imani folded her hands. No, you set out to save yourself. The words landed. Sloane's shoulders sagged as if something she'd been holding up finally collapsed. Yes, she whispered. At first, I thought I was in love. She opened the laptop and turned it toward them. On the screen was a timeline, clean, methodical, terrifying in its precision. Dates, calls, transfers. He told me he was going to leave you, Sloan said. After the holidays, he said Christmas was complicated. Family expectations, optics. A bitter laugh escaped her. He used that word a lot. Imani's jaw tightened. Sloan continued, voice trembling but steadying as she spoke. He also told me I was special, that I was the only one who really understood how much pressure he was under. He said he needed someone who believed in him without competing. Jade's eyes narrowed. And the money? Sloan hesitated. That came later. He started asking me to move files, rename folders, sit in on calls, just to listen. He said it was training, that he trusted me. Imani leaned forward. And when did you realize you were being positioned? Sloane's eyes flicked to Imani's face, then away. When he asked me to sign something, she pulled up a document on the screen, an internal compliance memo, backdated, naming her as the point of authorization for a questionable transfer. He said it was routine, Sloan said, but it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. And when I hesitated, he changed. Her voice dropped. He told me if this ever came out, I'd be the one holding the pen. Silence thickened the room. Imani felt a cold clarity settle in. This wasn't carelessness. This was design. He told me you would destroy me, Sloan went on, tears finally spilling. That if you ever suspected anything, you'd use your power to bury me. He said I needed protection, evidence, in case you tried to ruin my life. Jade swore under her breath. So you started collecting, Imani said. Sloan nodded. At first, it was just to protect myself. Emails, call logs. Then I realized, she took a shuddering breath. He was never going to leave you. He was just buying time, using me. And when he got scared, Jade said quietly, he planned to let you burn. Yes, Sloan wiped her face, ashamed. That's when I contacted Jade. I thought, if I expose you, if I prove you're part of it, maybe he'll choose me. Maybe I'll survive. Imani stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, it looked like anger might finally break through her composure. Instead, she stopped a few feet away and spoke softly. You were wrong about me. Sloan looked up, eyes wide. I don't destroy people to protect men, Imani said. I dismantle systems that protect them. Sloane's breath hitched. I know that now. Imani studied her. The fear, the regret, the raw intelligence buried under manipulation. She felt no jealousy, no hatred, only a grim understanding of how power chose its accomplices. What happens to you if this goes public? Imani asked. Sloan swallowed. I'll lose my job, my career, maybe worse. Yes, Imani said. But you'll also survive, because the truth is documented, and because you didn't disappear. She turned to Jade. Is the evidence clean? Jade nodded, painfully so. Imani looked back at Sloan. You don't get absolution, she said. You don't get to be the hero of this story, but you do get one thing. Sloan's voice shook. What? A chance to stop lying, Imani said, to yourself included. Tears slid down Sloane's face, but she nodded. I'll testify. I'll turn over everything. I won't hide. Imani stepped back, decision settling into her bones like steel. She felt no triumph, only resolve. Because now she understood the full shape of the betrayal. Graham hadn't just cheated. He had tried to turn two women into shields, one with ambition, one with fear, and stand untouched behind them. He had miscalculated. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, Imani allowed herself a small, dangerous smile. The motive was clear now, and so was the path forward. The snow stopped sometime after dusk, leaving Seattle glazed and shining, as if the city had been dipped in glass. Streetlights reflected off the sidewalks in long, golden streaks. Every surface looked polished, peaceful. Imani knew better now than to trust surfaces. She had just finished reviewing Daniel Cho's draft timeline. Dates, receipts, recusals, boundaries documented so clean they could cut, when the doorbell rang. Not a knock this time, a doorbell. Civilized, controlled, the kind of sound people use when they want to pretend they still have manners. Imani didn't move immediately. She stood in the living room and listened to it echo through the house, through the high ceiling, through the staircase where holiday garland still draped itself like a decoration that had missed the funeral. Jade had wanted to be here. Daniel had insisted she shouldn't be alone. But Imani had said, no. Some battles needed witnesses. This one needed presence. She walked to the door and looked through the glass panel. Graham stood on the porch in a black coat, hair neatly styled again, jaw shaved, his face arranged into the expression he used in boardrooms. Serious, concerned, reasonable. Beside him stood Evelyn Whitlock, wrapped in an ivory wool cape that made her look like she'd stepped out of a gala, not into the wreckage of her son's marriage. Her posture was perfect. Her eyes were not. Imani opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. Graham's gaze flicked over her, taking inventory. Evelyn's did the same, quicker and crueler, as if scanning for weakness. Imani, Graham began, voice gentle. Thank you for seeing us. No, Imano said calmly. I didn't invite you in. Evelyn's smile tightened. Don't be rude, sweetheart. It's Christmas week. Imani held the door open just enough to make it clear. This conversation belonged on the porch. Graham cleared his throat. We need to talk, privately, about everything. Imani let the silence stretch. There's nothing private left, she said. Evelyn stepped forward, heels clicking sharply on the porch boards. This house has been Whitlock adjacent for years, she said, as if claiming territory. My son helped build this life. Imani's gaze didn't shift. My mortgage company disagrees. Evelyn blinked, the first crack in her composure. Excuse me? Graham's jaw tightened. Imani, please. We don't have to do this like enemies. Imani tilted her head slightly. You made yourself my enemy when you brought a suitcase to your mistress. Evelyn's nostrils flared. That word, mistress, is vulgar. Imani's voice stayed soft. So is betrayal. Graham's expression flickered. Annoyance, panic, calculation, before he smoothed it again. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I'm here to fix it. Imani looked past him at the driveway, where a sleek SUV idled, its windows dark. It looked like a getaway plan waiting for permission. To fix what? She asked. Your marriage or your reputation? Graham's mouth opened, and Evelyn cut in smoothly, as if she were conducting an orchestra. Imani, she said, you're emotional right now. Understandable. But you need to consider the consequences of public spectacle. You have a position, a reputation, a responsibility to behave with dignity. There it was. Not are you hurt, not are you safe, but behave. Imani felt her spine straighten, the same instinct that rose when powerful people tried to discipline her into compliance. Dignity, she repeated. Is that what you call it when a man lies to his wife and uses her name as a shield? Graham's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Imani didn't answer him immediately. She watched his face, studying the moment he realized there were layers he hadn't accounted for. He had expected tears, bargaining, a scene he could spin. Instead, he was standing on a porch in falling darkness, facing a woman who was not shaking. "I'm talking about your work," Imani said. "The money, the contracts, the transfers." Graham froze. It was subtle, just a tightening of his jaw, a fractional widening of his eyes. But Imani saw it. She had spent her life reading people who tried to hide fear behind confidence. Evelyn's smile faltered. "Imani, don't be ridiculous." Imani glanced at her, almost with pity. "You should ask him what he's been doing," she said. "Ask him about shell vendors, about routing funds through discretionary accounts, about why his compliance analyst started collecting evidence." Graham's face drained of color. Evelyn turned sharply to him. "Graham?" He swallowed. "This isn't the time." "Oh, it's exactly the time," Imani interrupted, her voice still calm, still measured. "Because you didn't come here to apologize. You came here to manage me before the story breaks." Graham's mask cracked. "What story?" Imani smiled, small and lethal. "The one you tried to trap me inside." Evelyn stepped forward, anger blazing now. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're playing with forces you don't understand." Imani's gaze held hers. "I understand them perfectly," she said. "I've been navigating them my whole life." Graham's voice dropped, urgent. "Imani, please. If this goes public, it destroys everything. My career, my mother, My what?" Imani asked. "Your legacy." He flinched. Evelyn recovered faster than he did. "This house," she snapped, "is not yours to threaten with your theatrics. Graham will not be thrown out like a stray dog. This is his home." Imani didn't raise her voice. She simply reached into the side table by the door and pulled out a folder. Daniel had told her to keep it ready. Inside was a copy of the deed. She held it up, letting the porch light catch the official seal. "2 years ago," she said softly, "Graham transferred the title into my name. Sole ownership. For asset protection. Because you," she looked directly at Evelyn, "wanted the family insulated from lawsuits." Evelyn's face tightened. "That's not." "It is," Imani said. "You insisted it. You signed off. Congratulations." Graham stared at the paper as if it were a weapon pointed at his throat. "Imani, come on." Imani stepped closer, just enough that he could see the certainty in her eyes. "You have 2 hours," she said. "Take what you need. Leave what you don't. After that, the locks change." Evelyn's voice rose, sharp with disbelief. "You can't do this." Imani's smile was almost gentle. "I already have." Graham's gaze darted toward the idling SUV, toward his mother, toward the warm house behind Imani that suddenly looked like it belonged to someone else. His voice cracked. "You're going to ruin me." Imani's reply was quiet, unwavering. "No, Graham, you did that. I'm just done protecting you from the consequences." She stepped back and began to close the door. Evelyn's hands shot out, stopping it. Her eyes were wild now, the mask fully gone. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You think you can take what my family built and walk away untouched." Imani looked at Evelyn's hand on the door, then back at her face. "I'm not taking what you built," she said. "I'm taking what I refuse to lose." She pushed the door firmly but calmly, and Evelyn's hand slipped away. The door closed with a soft click. Not slammed, not dramatic, final. Imani leaned her forehead against the wood for a single breath, feeling the quiet surge back into the house. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady. Outside, she could hear Evelyn's voice rising, sharp and furious, cutting through the winter air like shattered glass. Inside, Imani turned, looked at the Christmas tree, and realized something that felt like a new kind of peace. The house wasn't his, and neither was her life anymore. The first strike didn't happen with shouting or vengeance. It happened with paperwork. At 6:40 a.m. the next morning, Daniel Cho sent Imani a message with a single sentence. "Do not speak to anyone without me." At 6:42, Jade sent another. Legal is done. Fact-checking is almost done. We have a window. Imani stood in her kitchen, watching steam curl from her coffee, as if the ordinary act of breathing in warmth could keep her grounded while the world prepared to ignite. Outside, Seattle was still under a thin layer of snow, bright and deceptive. Neighbors would wake, scrape windshields, carry cinnamon rolls to gatherings. Children would drag sleds down hills that never lasted long enough. In Imani's house, time moved differently now. Every hour had weight. On the table lay 3 stacks: Daniel's divorce filings, Jade's evidence summaries, and Imani's own timeline, recusal memos, financial separations, emails where she refused meetings that smelled like conflict. Proof, built quietly over years, now repurposed as armor. She wasn't planning revenge. She was preparing impact. At 8:15, her phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. She didn't answer. At 8:19, another call, then another. A text followed. "Please, we can settle this privately." Graham's voice, even in words, carried that familiar assumption that everything was negotiable, that truth could be softened into silence if the right price was offered. Imani stared at the message until it blurred, then placed the phone face down. She didn't need to read his fear. She could feel it. By 10 a.m., Daniel arrived with a folder of filings and a look that said he'd already anticipated 3 possible counterattacks. He laid the papers out like chess pieces. "Divorce petition," he said. "Emergency motion for exclusive use of the residence. Temporary restraining provisions, no harassment, no contact, and," he tapped another page, "a letter to Whitlock Capital's counsel informing them that any attempt to implicate you will be met with immediate legal response." Imani listened, absorbing the language as if it were a second dialect she'd always known but never wanted to speak at home. "And Jade?" she asked. Daniel's mouth tightened. "Jade is about to detonate a bomb. Our job is to make sure you're not standing too close to the blast radius." At noon, they moved to Jade's studio. It wasn't glamorous. It was efficient. Soundproof walls, 2 microphones, a laptop array, and a whiteboard filled with dates and arrows like a war plan. Jade's team hovered in controlled motion. An editor with headphones, a researcher flipping through documents, a lawyer on speakerphone repeating one phrase over and over: "Provable, provable, provable." Jade looked up as Imani entered, her eyes fierce. "You sure?" she asked quietly. Imani didn't hesitate. "Truth doesn't wait for comfort." Jade nodded once, then turned back to the screen. The headline draft glowed in stark black text: "Whitlock Capital, the resilience scam hiding in plain sight." Beneath it, the story unfolded like a blade. Shell vendors, routed funds, internal emails, recordings, the pattern of manipulation. It wasn't written like gossip. It was written like a case file. Every claim linked to evidence. Every line built to survive a courtroom. Imani watched, heart steady, as her husband's world was reduced to what it actually was: transactions and lies. But there was still one decision left. The one that would turn this from a private collapse into a public reckoning. Timing. Jade pointed to the calendar on the whiteboard. "We dropped December 27th, she said. "After Christmas, before New Year's. People are home. They're scrolling. They're primed for outrage." Imani's throat tightened. "And before he can disappear." "Exactly," Jade said. "He'll try to move money before year-end. If the story hits, banks freeze. Partners panic. Regulators wake up." Daniel's voice cut in, cool and precise. "We need to assume he's already preparing a counter-narrative." As if on cue, a notification flashed on Jade's monitor, an email alert from a public relations firm. The subject line made the room feel colder. "Statement from Whitlock Capital regarding recent personal matters." Jade clicked it open. A draft press statement filled the screen. It was smooth, sympathetic, vaguely wounded. It mentioned marital difficulties. It hinted at a disgruntled spouse. It used the phrase politically motivated attacks twice. Imani read it without blinking. Daniel swore softly. He's moving faster than I thought. Jade's lips pressed into a thin line. He's going to try to paint you as the weapon, not the witness. Imani exhaled slowly. Let him. Jade looked at her. That's easy to say now. It won't be easy when the comments turn ugly. Imani's gaze didn't waver. I've lived with ugly my whole life. I'm done letting it steer me. At 2:30 p.m., Sloane's final packet arrived via secure transfer. Additional emails, a calendar export, and one new audio clip Jade hadn't heard yet. Jade plugged in her headphones and listened, her face tightening with each second. When she finished, she slid the headphones across the table to Imani without a word. Imani put them on. Graham's voice filled her ears, intimate and casual in the way people become when they believe they're untouchable. Imani's perfect for this, he was saying. She's clean. She's credible. She makes it look like we're doing something noble. People love her story. It's a shield, a pause, a low laugh. If it ever goes sideways, she'll take the heat. They always do. Imani removed the headphones slowly. For a moment, she couldn't speak, not because she was shocked, because the confirmation was so precise it felt like a blade sliding into place. Jade's voice was quiet. That's the line that breaks him. Daniel nodded. And it's the line that protects you. Imani looked at the screen again, at the headline, at the evidence arranged into inevitability. She thought of the neighborhoods depending on that money, of the people who would never know why a project stalled, why a flood barrier didn't rise in time, why help didn't arrive. Graham hadn't just cheated on her. He had cheated the city. Imani placed her hands flat on the table. Run it, she said. Jade held her gaze, measuring the moment. Once it's out, there's no pulling it back. Imani's voice was steady, almost serene. Good. I'm not interested in pulling back. Outside the studio, Seattle's lights began to come on again as evening fell. The city glowing like it always did. Beautiful, unaware, unprepared for what would happen when the truth hit public air. Inside, the first strike was set. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, Imani felt something like power. Not the kind that came from titles or speeches, but the kind that came from refusing to be used. The truth was loaded now. All that remained was to pull the trigger. The backlash didn't wait for the morning. It arrived at 12:04 a.m. in the form of a notification that lit up Imani's phone like a warning flare. Whitlock Capital denies allegations. Calls report reckless and politically motivated. By 12:06, the headline had multiplied. By 12:10, her name was trending, attached to words like vendetta, ambition, betrayed wife, power play. Imani sat alone at her dining table, the house dark except for the glow of her laptop and the faint pulse of the city outside. She hadn't slept. She hadn't expected to. The story was out now. Jade's investigation had dropped exactly as planned, clean, brutal, impossible to ignore. Banks were named, dates were verified, audio clips embedded, receipts stacked on receipts, and still, the noise rose. Her phone vibrated again. A voicemail, unknown number. She didn't answer, but the transcription appeared anyway. This is Councilman Harris. We need to talk. Immediately. The optics. She deleted it. Another call followed. Then another. Messages from colleagues who had once praised her integrity now hedged their words with careful distance. Just checking in. Hope you're okay. This is complicated. At 1:17 a.m., a national outlet pushed a notification that made her chest tighten. Questions raised about city officials' role in financing scandal. Questions raised. Not answers found. Not evidence reviewed. Just questions. Thinly veiled suspicion dressed as journalism. Imani closed her eyes and counted her breath. This was the part no one warned you about. The moment after truth breaks, when it doesn't feel like justice, it feels like punishment. By morning, the city woke hungry. Protesters gathered outside City Hall, some carrying signs that said, "Clean house," and others that said, "Follow the money." A few signs were less subtle. Who watches the watcher? She knew. Imani watched the live feed in silence as reporters speculated. Panelists debated her motives, and strangers dissected her life with casual cruelty. She's always been ambitious, one commentator said, lips pursed. You have to wonder how much she benefited. Another chimed in. Power couples often share information. It's naive to think she was completely in the dark. Imani's stomach churned, not because she doubted herself, but because she recognized the pattern. When powerful men fall, people look for the nearest woman to blame. Her phone rang. Daniel, it's happening, he said, unnecessarily. Subpoena request just came in. Standard. Don't panic. I'm not, Imani replied, though her hands had begun to shake. You will be questioned, Daniel continued, not because they think you're guilty, because they want to be seen questioning you. She closed her eyes. How bad does it get? Daniel didn't soften it. Worse before it gets better. By noon, Whitlock Capital released a second statement, longer, sharper, and far more calculated. It mentioned Imani by name. It implied she had knowledge of irregularities. It suggested retaliation following personal disputes. It framed her as emotionally compromised. Graham's fingerprints were all over it. Imani read the statement once, then again, feeling something hot and dangerous rise in her chest. Not fear, not grief. Fury. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jade. I'm so sorry. He's going nuclear. Imani typed back with steady fingers. So will I, just not yet. At 2:40 p.m., her assistant knocked on the door of her office, eyes wide. There's a crowd downstairs. Media. They're asking if you'll comment. Imani looked up from her desk, where Daniel's timeline lay open like a map through a minefield. No comment, she said calmly. Not today. But not today, she repeated. Silence, she knew, was dangerous, but unprepared speech was fatal. By late afternoon, the attacks grew uglier. Anonymous posts surfaced, dissecting her childhood, her education, her salary. Someone circulated an old photo of her at a fundraiser and labeled it evidence. Another accused her of sleeping her way into policy influence. The words familiar enough to feel rehearsed. Imani stared at the screen until the words blurred. For the first time since this began, doubt crept in. Not about the truth, but about the cost. She thought of the neighborhoods counting on her, of the staffers who trusted her leadership, of the young black girls who had written to her over the years, saying, if you can do it, maybe I can too. Was she dragging them into the blast? Her phone rang again. Jade this time. Imani, she said urgently, we need to talk. I know, Imani replied. He's framing me. Yes, and worse, he's booking interviews, a sympathy play. He wants to go on air before regulators move. If he controls the emotional narrative, facts won't matter as much. Imani leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her in a heavy wave. So what do you want me to do? A pause. Then Jade said quietly, I want you to speak on your terms. Imani closed her eyes. Images flashed through her mind. The porch confrontation, Evelyn's cold smile, Graham's voice on the recording calling her a shield. She felt again the weight of being looked at, evaluated, doubt. If she spoke, they would tear her apart. If she stayed silent, they would write her into his story. There was no safe choice, only an honest one. She opened her eyes. Not here, she said. Not to them. Jade exhaled. I was hoping you'd say that. Outside, the sun dipped behind the skyline, the city slipping into twilight. Seattle's lights flickered on, one by one, as if nothing extraordinary were happening. Inside her office, Imani stood and walked to the window, looking out at the streets she had worked so hard to protect. She had spent her career preparing for storms. This one was different. This one had a face, a voice, a narrative designed to bury her under doubt. Imani squared her shoulders. They want a reaction, she said softly. They want me defensive, apologetic, small. Jade's voice came back, steady and fierce. What do you want to be? Imani didn't hesitate. Clear, she said, and impossible to twist. Outside, the crowd shouted questions into the cold air. Inside, the backlash raged. And somewhere beneath the noise, the truth waited, patient, sharp, and ready for its next opening. The studio lights were colder than Imani expected. They washed the room in a pale, unforgiving glow that left nowhere to hide. No shadows, no softness, no room for performance. This wasn't City Hall, where microphones waited politely and questions arrived with advance notice. This was national television. This was where stories hardened into history. Imani sat in the chair they had placed for her, spine straight, hands folded loosely in her lap. She wore a simple dark suit, no statement colors, no armor disguised as fashion, just herself, exactly as she was. Across from her, the interviewer offered a careful smile. Kind, neutral, dangerous. "Thank you for being here," he said. "I know this hasn't been an easy week." Imani met his gaze. "Hard things are usually the ones worth telling the truth about." The red light blinked on. "Your ex-husband," the interviewer began, "says you're motivated by revenge, that you turned on him after he asked for a divorce. He claims you knew about the financial irregularities and stayed silent until it benefited you. What do you say to that?" The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Somewhere Graham was watching. Evelyn too. So were millions of strangers who had already decided who Imani was before she opened her mouth. She didn't rush. She thought of the first night, the snow, the laughter behind the door, the way the world had tilted but not collapsed. She thought of Jade's files spread across her kitchen table, of Daniel's calm voice laying out the risks, of the comments calling her cold, ambitious, dangerous. Then she spoke. "I was married to Graham Whitlock for 6 years," she said evenly. "I loved him. I supported his work. I built my career independently and insisted on clear boundaries between my public office and his private business." The interviewer nodded, encouraging her to continue. "What I didn't know," Imani said, "was that he was living a double life. One where he betrayed our marriage, and another where he betrayed the public trust." A murmur rippled through the control room. "When I discovered the affair, I left," she went on. "I didn't threaten him. I didn't negotiate. I didn't ask for favors. I asked questions. And when the answers led to evidence of financial crimes, I did what I've always done in my career." She paused, letting the silence sharpen. "I refused to look away." The interviewer leaned forward slightly. "But some people say timing matters, that you waited until after the divorce." Imani's mouth curved, not in a smile, but in recognition of the tactic. "Let's talk about timing," she said. "The investigation began before my marriage ended. The documents existed before I knew his name would be attached to them in headlines. The only thing that changed after Christmas Eve was that I stopped protecting a man who was willing to let me take the fall for his actions." The words landed cleanly, precisely. "He used my reputation as cover," she continued. "He referred to me, on a recorded call, as a shield. He believed my credibility would absorb the impact of his decisions. When I realized that, I chose transparency." The interviewer glanced down at his notes. "So you deny this is revenge?" Imani looked directly into the camera then, past the lights, past the glass, past the noise. "This isn't revenge," she said. "Revenge is personal. It's loud. It's reactive. This is accountability." Her voice didn't waver. "And there's something else I want to say, because it keeps getting lost in the spectacle." She inhaled once, steadying herself. "Women, especially black women, are taught to make themselves smaller when powerful men are uncomfortable. We're told to soften the truth to preserve reputations that were never built to include us. We're told to forgive quietly, to endure gracefully, to accept blame for betrayals we did not commit." The interviewer didn't interrupt. The room seemed to hold its breath. "I did that for years," Imani said. "I compromised. I protected. I stayed silent in rooms where silence was expected of me. And all it did was make it easier for someone else to misuse my integrity." She straightened, shoulders back, not defiant but unmovable. "I'm not driven by revenge," she said. "I'm driven by truth. And the truth is this: when someone lies to you, cheats on you, and then tries to use your name to escape consequences, you don't owe them loyalty. You owe yourself honesty. The interviewer blinked, visibly recalibrating. What happens now? He asked. Are you afraid of what this could cost you? Imani considered the question. She thought of the backlash, the doubts, the names she'd been called. She thought of the young girls who would watch this clip later, wondering what strength looked like when it wasn't wrapped in perfection. Yes, she said, it has cost me. It will continue to cost me. But fear isn't a reason to lie. She leaned forward slightly. And if telling the truth makes powerful people uncomfortable, that's not a flaw in the truth. That's the point. The red light went dark. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the producer exhaled sharply behind the cameras. Someone whispered, "Damn." Imani stood, heart pounding now, not from panic, but from release. She had said it. Not everything, not the pain, not the private grief, but enough. Outside the studio, her phone began to vibrate non-stop. Messages, notifications, headlines rewriting themselves in real time. Truth, not Revenge City, official speaks out. Narrative shifts. Whitlock denials collapse under evidence. Imani didn't look at them yet. She stepped outside into the cold air, the city buzzing around her, unaware that something had just tilted back into place. For the first time since the backlash began, she felt steady. Not victorious, not vindicated, clear. And clarity, she knew now, was far more dangerous than anger ever could be. Verdict season did not arrive all at once. It crept in, slow and merciless, through sealed envelopes in carefully worded press releases, through subpoenas delivered by people who refused to make eye contact, through the quiet reshuffling of power that happens when institutions sense blood in the water. By the second week of January, Whitlock Capital's offices were half empty. Desks cleared overnight. Access badges deactivated without explanation. Senior partners suddenly on leave. The firm's website still glowed with language about integrity and sustainable futures. But the words rang hollow now, echoes in a building that had begun to rot from the inside. Imani watched it unfold from a distance she had earned the hard way. Daniel kept her days tightly managed, meetings staggered, statements routed through counsel, every appearance weighed like a legal instrument. She testified once, briefly, her answers clipped and factual. No editorializing, no emotion, just dates, documents, decisions. The truth, delivered clean. Still, the cost came due. Graham was indicted in late January. Federal charges, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering tied to municipal funds. The headline ran with his photo, jaw set, eyes hollow, the confidence finally gone. Evelyn Whitlock released a statement an hour later. It spoke of misunderstandings, of family pain, of a rush to judgment. No apology, no accountability. Imani read it once and closed the tab. The trial date was set for March. That was when Graham tried one last time. The message came through Daniel, not directly, a request for mediation, for a private resolution that would spare everyone further damage. It was accompanied by an offer so large it made Imani's stomach turn. Money, property, silence. Daniel laid it out in his office, voice neutral. He's offering you enough to walk away very comfortable. Imani didn't look at the number. She stared at the city through the window, the gray sky pressing low against the buildings. He's afraid, she said. Yes, Daniel replied. And desperate men get creative. She turned back to him. If I take it, what happens? Daniel didn't sugarcoat it. The case continues, but your silence would be weaponized. They'd say the settlement proves doubt, that you cashed out, that truth had a price. Imani nodded once. Then it's not an offer. It's a trap. Daniel studied her. You don't want the money. No, she said. I want the record straight. He exhaled, something like admiration flickering across his face. Then I'll decline. Outside the courtroom on the first day of trial, reporters clustered behind barricades, voices overlapping, questions sharpened into accusations. Imani did not stop. She walked past them with measured steps, coat buttoned, head high, flanked by no one. She didn't need a shield anymore. Inside, the proceedings were brutal in their precision. Forensic accountants traced money through shell after shell, diagrams lighting up screens like maps of betrayal. Emails were read aloud, Graham's words stripped of charm, reduced to intent. Audio clips played, his voice casual as he spoke about leverage, cover, timing. About Imani, each time her name was mentioned, a murmur rippled through the room. She did not react. Sloane testified on the fourth day. She looked different now, steadier, older somehow, as if fear had aged her and then released her. Her voice shook only once, when the prosecutor asked why she'd kept the records. "Because I realized," Sloane said, eyes fixed on the jury, "that he wasn't going to protect me. He was going to use me. And if I didn't tell the truth, I'd be complicit." Graham did not look at her. When it was his turn to testify, the room felt tighter. He spoke of pressure, of expectations, of being misunderstood. He implied, carefully, that Imani's ambition had created distance, that her visibility had complicated his work. The prosecutor let him talk. Then she played the recording. "She's a shield." The words filled the courtroom, unmistakable, uneditable. Something broke then. Not dramatically, not loudly, but decisively. The jury returned its verdict 3 days later. Guilty on all major counts. The room exhaled as one, a collective release of breath that felt like the end of a long-held lie. Graham's shoulders sagged. Evelyn did not cry. She stared straight ahead, face carved from marble, in fury. Sentencing was set for May. Outside the courthouse, microphones surged forward, voices clamoring for reaction. Imani stopped, not because she owed anyone a statement, but because she chose to mark the moment. "This was never about revenge," she said, her voice carrying in the open air. "It was about accountability. And accountability doesn't end with a verdict. It begins there." Then she walked away. That night, alone in her living room, Imani sat with the quiet again. But this time, it didn't press in on her. It held. Verdict season had taken its toll on her reputation, her peace, her sense of safety in the world. But it had also done something else. It had drawn a line no one could erase. The truth was no longer hers to defend. It stood on its own now, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, Imani allowed herself to believe that what came next might finally belong to her. After the fall, the world didn't end. That surprised Imani most of all. The morning after the verdict, Seattle woke to rain again. Soft, ordinary, persistent. Traffic moved. Coffee shops opened. The city did what cities always do. It absorbed catastrophe and kept breathing. Imani stood at her kitchen window with a mug she had reheated twice and forgotten to drink. Her phone lay untouched on the counter, face down, as if it had finally learned to be quiet. She had expected to feel triumph, vindication, something loud enough to match the noise that had chased her for weeks. Instead, she felt light, not happy, not relieved, unburdened. Daniel called just after 9. "Sentencing will be heavy," he said. "The judge won't be lenient. There's talk of an appeal, but it's procedural theater." Imani closed her eyes. "And after that?" Daniel paused. "After that, the legal part of your life gets simpler. The rest," he exhaled, "that's up to you." Up to you. The words settled slowly, like a permission she hadn't realized she was waiting for. She went back to City Hall that afternoon, not for a press conference or a photo opportunity, but to clear out her office. The walls still held maps she'd marked with red and blue lines. Flood zones, mitigation plans, futures imagined and fought for. Staffers passed her in the hallway with careful smiles, as if unsure whether to congratulate or console. She didn't stop to explain. By the end of the week, she announced her resignation. The headlines were immediate and predictably confused. "Official steps down after scandal. Brooks leaves city role following Whitlock verdict." Some called it an admission. Others called it grace. Imani called it choice. Jade met her that night at a quiet bar overlooking the Sound, the kind of place where conversations stayed low and windows stayed wide. They sat with their coats still on, hands wrapped around glasses, watching ferries cut clean lines through the dark water. "Do you regret it?" Jade asked finally. Imani considered the question with the care it deserved. "No," she said. "I love that work, but I don't want my legacy to be cleaning up other people's messes forever." Jade nodded slowly. "What comes next?" Imani smiled faintly. "Something smaller and bigger." 2 weeks later, Brooks' Resilience Studio was incorporated. Not a firm built on volume or influence, but on refusal. Refusal to work with clients who treated ethics as optional. Refusal to separate impact from accountability. Cities approached quietly at first, then with urgency. Nonprofits followed. Foundations asked questions that sounded like hope. Imani worked longer hours than she had at City Hall, but they felt different now. Chosen. Grounded. Her days were filled with plans that didn't need political permission to matter. She donated the settlement money, not to erase the past, but to redirect it. Community flood shelters, legal funds for whistleblowers, a scholarship for public policy students from neighborhoods like the ones she'd grown up in, where storms didn't just flood streets, they erased futures. When the first thank you letter arrived, handwritten and awkwardly earnest, she cried. Healing, she learned, was not linear. There were nights she woke gasping, hearing Graham's voice from the recording, seeing headlines reassemble themselves in her dreams. There were days when she missed the rhythm of her old life, even knowing it had been built alongside a lie. And then there were moments like this one. The appeal notice arrived in early March, thin and formal, delivered without drama. Daniel called an hour later. "As expected," he said, "it won't go far." Imani stared at the document, waiting for the old surge of fear. It didn't come. "Let him try," she said quietly. "I'm not his audience anymore." Spring crept into the city by degrees. Buds on bare branches, longer evenings, light that lingered. Imani found herself walking more, letting the city meet her without expectation. People recognized her sometimes, most didn't. One afternoon, she passed a construction site where a new seawall was rising, concrete and steel forming something solid against the water. A project she had once fought for, now moving forward without her name attached. She felt no bitterness, just pride. After the fall, what remained wasn't wreckage. It was space, room to build without apology, to rest without permission, to exist without being someone's shield. Imani stood at the edge of the site, rain misting her hair, and understood something with a clarity that felt almost gentle. She hadn't survived the collapse. She had stepped through it. And everything waiting on the other side was finally hers to choose. 1 year later, Seattle tried to look innocent again. Rain polished the streets until they shone like glass. The evergreens held their color through the cold, as if they'd never known loss. Holiday lights returned to Queen Anne Hill, blinking patiently, on, off, on, like time could be convinced to repeat itself without consequences. Imani Brooks stood in her living room and watched the tree glow, smaller this year, imperfect in a way that made her smile. There were no curated ornaments, no staged elegance, just keepsakes. A ferry ticket stub tucked into a branch, a tiny wooden house carved by a local artist, a paper star folded by a scholarship student who'd written, "Thank you," on the back in careful block letters. The house felt different, too. Not because the walls had changed, but because she had. A year ago, this room had been a museum of a life she was trying to preserve. Now it was a home, lived in, honest, hers. She could still remember the sound of Graham's voice in the snow, the way he tried to make her doubt what she saw. She could still remember the headlines, the comments, the accusation disguised as curiosity. But memory no longer had teeth. The doorbell rang at 8:17 p.m. Imani opened the door to laughter and warmth spilling into the night. Jade swept in first, cheeks flushed from the cold, carrying a bottle of sparkling cider like it was a victory flag. Daniel followed with a tray of food, pretending he wasn't proud of himself for once. A few clients, now friends, came next. Women who had built careers by refusing to be quiet. And last, hesitating in the doorway, like she still wasn't sure she deserved entry, was Sloane. She held a simple box of cookies, homemade and slightly uneven, and her eyes flicked to Imani's face with the nervous honesty of someone who had learned the hard way what truth costs. "I almost didn't come," Sloane admitted softly. "I know," Imani said, stepping aside. "But you did. That matters." They didn't hug. They didn't pretend the past was gentle. They simply shared the same air, in the same room, without lies between them. For tonight, that was enough. The evening unfolded in quiet bursts of joy, music low, plates passed hand to hand, stories told with a kind of laughter that comes from survival, not luck. At midnight, Jade raised her glass. "To Imani," she said, voice bright and sure, "who taught us that you don't owe your silence to anyone, and that truth, when you hold it steady, becomes a door." They drank, and outside the window the city lights shimmered against the rain like 1,000 small possibilities. After everyone left, the house grew still again, but it was a peaceful stillness now, the kind that didn't press in, the kind that held you. Imani stood by the window with a cup of tea and checked her phone. One new notification, a message from an unknown number. "I filed another appeal. You could make this easier. You could say something. You always like being heard." She stared at the words for a long moment, waiting for the familiar tightening in her chest. Nothing came. Imani blocked the number and set the phone down, untouched by the echo of a man who no longer had access to her life. She turned back to the room, to the tree, to the small paper star that read, "Thank you," to the quiet evidence that her pain had been converted into something useful. Shelters funded, scholarships awarded, projects built clean and accountable. Home, rewritten, not as a place where she waited for someone to choose her, but as a place where she chose herself every day. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the inside out, take a moment to like, comment, and follow. Tell me the line that hit you hardest, or the moment you knew she was done shrinking. Your support helps these stories reach more people who need them. Imani lifted her teacup toward her reflection in the glass. A small salute to the woman she used to be. "Merry Christmas," she whispered. Not to the past, to the future she'd earned.